Well, hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. I appreciate the invitation. I look forward to this every year. I've come to look forward. In fact, I was looking back over, went into my files and found my past notes from my past addresses. And I repeat myself a lot. And I hope that's not because I have nothing new to say, because I'm thinking about this all the time. But in thinking about it, there are some things that are very fundamental to me and to my personal philosophy of education and my theory of education. And I haven't I haven't been shaken from those beliefs. And in fact, as time goes by, I find further validation for them. And so I would like to share Vision 2020. I think this is apropos for where we are. And the nice thing about doing this, where I'm not standing in front of a group as I normally am, is I can sit in my office at home where I've been preparing and treat this as a seminar. So I'd like you to think about this as we're sitting around a seminar table together and having a discussion, because I hope to have that discussion at the end. Um, I've been asked to participate on a panel of university presidents at a Reimagine Education conference in London in December. And so this has been great preparation as I think about what that means. Um, as you know, we're currently involved, or many of you know at least, we're currently involved in really trying to reimagine higher education at Ashford University and what that means to us. Reimagining implies innovation, and these adaptive learning and artificial intelligence and bots and all of those are. I hope you can hear me. Okay, I'm getting a sign that says my internet is unstable. I know I'm unstable, but the internet is unstable.
No, we lost you for just a second, Dr. Swenson, but you're back.
Okay, good. I was saying that these days, innovation implies something having to do with technology. And that is somewhat the case. I mean, we want to think about artificial intelligence and adaptive learning and bots and all of those kinds of things. But innovation can take many forms. And I'd like to think of innovation in that larger sense and think out loud about it with you. One of the things that I'm going to repeat is a title of a chapter in a book on innovation in professional education that was written, gosh, get it going on 30 years ago now. It was written by Boyatzis, Cowan, and Kolb. David Kolb, for some of you who are into learning theory, know that name. And they described the reimagination of the MBA program at Case Western Reserve University back then. And the line in the last chapter, or the title of the last chapter asked this provocative question, and I come back to this all the time: what if learning were the purpose of education? And those of us who are affiliated with the university probably heard me talk about this. We really are trying to reaffirm, to reimagine what we do as an institution. I'm going to read one other quotation from Boyatzis, Cowan, and Kolb's book. They say, "It is a mistake to assume that teaching and learning are the same thing. What you teach is not necessarily what I learn, and what I learn may be other than what you teach. Our view is that education has tended to focus on teaching, often assuming learning rather than promoting it." And that I think is a core part of what I believe. And it lies at the core of the re-engineering and reimagination that we're trying to do as an institution. Over the last number of months, we've been focused on a refocus on our mission and on our student population and on changes in higher education in order to fix, as you would fix a point on a compass, who we are compared with what we were and what we need to be now. As a result of that, as a number of you know, we've embarked on a new strategy or a pivot in our strategy that focuses on identifying our core programs. And those core programs are based on who our population is. Ashford serves the working adult population. And what we know about working adults, generally speaking, and certainly there are exceptions, but generally speaking, is that working adults seek out academic experiences and programs that will help them improve their lives by improving their careers. And so those are the core programs where we believe that we will best serve our population by placing our focus and allocating our resources in support of those students. And then to look at core competencies. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, but we're making a shift as part of this strategic pivot, I guess, if you wanted to use that term, to a set of competencies that embody not only what employers are looking for, but they're also the same competencies that adults need anyway. And they're the NACE competencies, the National Association of Colleges and Employers. I'm going to go in a little more detail on that later, but the focus here is on career and professional growth. And I'd like to talk about those students for just a minute. Adults, when they return to school, often have a very operational, instrumental interest in education. As faculty members, we want them to be thinking lofty thoughts and focused on lifelong learning and on learning everything. And in actuality, that's not where many of them are. It is where some are, but it's not where all are when they come in. They're looking for they're looking for a way to achieve this current goal that they have, and they see education as a way of doing that. And so it is for them something that's instrumental and operational and intentional, but they may not have the view of education that ultimately I hope they will have when their program is over. And I've told this story before, and I'm not going to belabor it, but there was a point in the middle of my master's program where that light went on. And I want that to happen to all of our students. The NACE competencies fit very closely with our WASC competencies. And it just so happens that those are the same competencies that will help us succeed in life, in addition to our careers and professions. And we've sort of coined it's DAT, the durable, adaptive, transferable competencies that will help our students succeed in life and succeed in the workplace. And as a matter of fact, they just so happen to be the same competencies that employers identify as those most important to them. And so we feel as we refocus on our core programs and our core curriculum and our core competencies, that all of those things are coming together at a very important time in the history of higher education and in the history of our institution to decide how we can most effectively fulfill our public purpose. And I'd like to go back to the notion of innovation and what it means in a larger sense. If, as the quotation I read earlier is correct, learning ought to be the purpose of education, they ask the question, what if learning were the purpose of education? Then innovation is any change or improvement in the way you do things that improves learning, or that leads to improved learning, or that fosters improved learning. And I think it takes three forms. One is innovation in how we design learning in order to be most effective. And that's the sexy part of teaching and learning, because we love to think about how to use technology to improve what students learn. And there are many, and I mean, I'm crazy about technology. I think it's fun, but I'm also pragmatic about it and recognize that there are limits to it, that there are unintended consequences of it, and that the results don't always live up to the hype. And so as we approach that kind of innovation, we need to be careful not to overreach and not to assume that the technologies will do more for us than they can. Two examples that I loved teaching in a classroom. And I cite two examples just in my own memory. One is as a undergraduate student in a college algebra class, where I hadn't been a great math student in high school. I was passable, and then when I took college algebra, it was a grind for me. And I ultimately passed and did okay. But I remember the experience of being taught by a student who didn't speak very good English, and whose back was always to the class and writing on the whiteboard. And I contrast that with what I tried to do as a classroom teacher. I loved doing that. I loved standing in front of a class and leading discussions and introducing concepts and theories and taking students through the learning process. And I read an article, it's been quite a while ago, but it just popped into my mind, that was in the Chronicle, that it was called In Praise of Slow Teaching. Everything moves pretty fast these days. I think Ferris Bueller said that. Things move pretty fast. You got to pay attention, you might miss it. And because they do, sometimes we need to stop and reflect. I'm going to talk about one of the NACE competencies in a minute that deals with decision making and problem solving. But the basis of good decision making and problem solving is reflective thinking. And things move so fast, we don't often take time to reflect. And there are times when online education and the lives of our students, because they're busy working adults with a number of life roles, interfere with that ability to stop and take a deep breath and just think reflectively and think with some discipline through a process. And I think I would like to, as we continue to improve the design of learning at Ashford, that we focus a lot on that. How do we build an environment where students will have the time to reflect? We know that one of the most effective ways to do that is through encouraging meaningful engagement with faculty members and with other students. And I'm not sure that the tools that we use always promote the meaningful engagement. Sometimes it's just checking off, I've done this on a list, and we don't do it in ways that force us and our students to be really thoughtful and reflective. And that's where the insights come. And so the first area is, how do we design learning to be most effective? The second is what do we teach? What is it that the students need to learn that we have to teach, in keeping in mind that what they learn may be other than what I teach, and what I teach may not be the same as what they learn. And the third is, how do we organize ourselves to do that? And as we've undertaken the change in our strategic direction and refocusing on our current students and what they need, we're getting an opportunity to do all three of those, and I find that very exciting. First of all, I would like to spend a few minutes on that first. How do we design learning to be most effective? I think about the definitions of learning, and most of us have read the textbook kinds of definitions. Part of my career was spent at Western Governors in competency-based education and going to school on that concept. And I think we should be thinking about competence because it matches with those NACE competencies that I mentioned a minute ago and that I will mention again. We should be thinking about competence rather than learning objectives. And I'm not saying learning objectives are bad, learning outcomes. Learning outcomes ought to reflect competence. There are, if I've said for years and years, and people that I've worked with probably get sick of hearing me say it, but the way that we judge ourselves is at the end of a program, ultimately, the student knows what he or she should know. They can do what they should be able to do, and they can apply that and grow in competence, and do it with values, ethical values, and professional values that are appropriate. Competence has 3 or 4 elements. 1 is to know something. 2 is to know how. What do I do with that? How can I know that better and know how to apply it? The 3rd is actually doing it or applying it and demonstrating proficiency. And the 4th is to show progress. When most of us begin our careers, we're neophytes still. Even if a person shows that they are competent in terms of their ability to know how, and do, they may do so at a minimal level, at a level that we would describe it as competence, or at an expert level. Most of us, when we are in school, the expertise, the professional competence comes after years of practicing that. The habitual practice of that skill, adding experience and gaining wisdom to apply it. And so when we think about learning, I hope that we'll think about that shift to measuring competence. And I think I have mentioned before that, when we have a wonderful program, the Master of Science in Instructional Design and Technology, the MSIDT, that was designed as a competency-based course. And when we were talking about it, I would contrast that. I would say, shouldn't all of our courses be competency-based? That's why the student is doing it, and especially in a program designed to help them in their careers, that has that as one of its ultimate purposes. So we go from competence to expertise, and there are many books written on the subject of what expertise is and how you measure it. One that was developed by a person who I'm going to quote here. So how do we foster learning? And I use the term foster intentionally. I'm going to read several quotations that I think illustrate this, and that go farther to the point. of what Boyatzis, Cowan, and Kolb said about not making the mistake that teaching and learning are the same thing. Herbert Simon, who is a Nobel Prize winning laureate, won the economics prize, an economist, an innovator, one of the fathers of artificial intelligence. He was at Carnegie Mellon for many, many years until his death. But Herb Simon said this: learning results from what the student does and thinks, and only from what the student does and thinks. The teacher can advance learning only by influencing what the student does to learn. So that's where that rub between teaching and learning happens, that we can be giving the most engaging lecture in the world, but if the student isn't engaged and thinking through that, they're not learning anything. He said in another article, he said this: the first principle, learning has to occur in the students. You can do anything you like in the classroom or elsewhere, and I would say the elsewhere is online. You can stand on your head, and it doesn't make a whit of difference unless you cause a change in the behavior of your students. David, and there are a number of ways to do that. I wrote in a blog I wrote quite a while ago, but I wrote this. I said, learning happens only when the brain is ready to learn. And the brain is ready to learn when it senses a need. Sometimes that need results from a reaction to danger. We're being threatened, and so we have to learn in order to deal with that. But sometimes that need comes from the heart, and it's when the need to learn becomes a passion out of a curiosity or a drive or an obsession. And I know that many of those of you listening to this today have caught that bug. There are things that you want to learn. We know that context means everything. And I'm going to speak about context in just a minute. But I'd like to talk about the two sides of learning. And I've spoken of this before. This is another one that I have tended to repeat over time, but I'm going to do it again. There are two sides to the learning process, and the one leads to the other. The cognitive side is what we normally think of. That's the activity in the brain that causes us to store that information in a way and store it with our experience that results in the change of behavior that Herb Simon wrote of. The other side is the affective side. It has to do with our emotions and our feelings. The Scottish Enlightenment philosopher David Hume wrote this. He said, reason is and ought to be only to be the slave of the passions and can never pretend to any office other than to serve and obey them. Reason, he's saying, that ability to reason comes because the passions force us to do that. And you think about, I think we've all taught when we knew the students that were hungry and wanted to learn and had a desire for whatever reason, and those who didn't respond or participate. And you have to say to yourself, okay, why didn't they? Where did I fail? Because our job as teachers is to engage the affective part of the student's brain. And there are a number of ways we do that. And I'm going to talk about some of those as we go through and talk about how we create this. The second is what is it that we're going to teach and what do we want them to learn? Now, obviously, it goes without saying the subject matter of the course as determined by the faculty members. But in the process of learning that subject matter, there is more than just the facts of the course, the concepts of finance or the classification systems in biology, or the facts of how to diagram a sentence in English, in an English course. It's the skills that should accompany that and be a partner in the learning. And so that's where I'd like to talk about the NACE. The NACE, and in 2019, they just finished a survey of employers that took the different NACE competencies and put them in order as to what employers think now are the most important. And they do this every year, they repeat them. In 2019, employers rated critical thinking and problem solving as the number one. Professionalism and work ethic is number two. And I want you to think about these, how we do this. And when we teach the subject, how do we also teach these and help people become competent and proficient, not only in the concepts of the course, but in the skills that need to accompany them if they're going to be successful. The third is oral and written communication. The fourth is digital technology. The fifth is leadership. And I'm trying to find where I put the other pages to this. Teamwork and collaboration, all of those kinds of things. And teamwork and collaboration were number two, I believe. I left that one out and I apologize. We have to pay as much attention to developing these competencies as we pay to the subject matter expertise that a student gains. Because if we only teach the subject matter and a student can pass a test where they explain all the concepts and they demonstrate that they know that and they may have even mastered the concepts of the subject matter, unless at the same time they've advanced in their ability to think critically and solve problems and to participate in teamwork and collaboration and have developed a better sense of professionalism and professional values, and have improved in oral and written communication, and have developed digital technology skills and leadership, all of those that make up those competencies. Unless we've furthered that, we haven't done the whole job. We've only done part. And I think that's an absolutely critical piece. And sometimes we leave it out. As faculty members teaching in our disciplines, that's the approach that we take. And so how do we build a curriculum? How do we design learning? And how do we design the content that will make up learning, and do it in such a way that the students are not only getting the subject matter of the discipline, but they're also getting in a way that will help them be more competent in applying that knowledge in the workplace. And again, I would say that we have, if we haven't done both of those, we've failed our students. And I'm hoping as we make this shift in our strategic direction, and as we focus on developing those core competencies as mentioned by, laid out by NACE, and I think I mentioned they fit wonderfully with the WASC competencies as well. And we need to pay attention to both of those and design learning experiences that will provide that. At the end of the day, though, there will, a lot of the learning that takes place will take place because a teacher engaged with our students. Katie mentioned that I have the privilege at commencement twice a year of uh, standing in a receiving line of students and their faculty members. And I have to say, they're so proud to be there. And their families are proud of them. And I asked that question of the kids, and they said, yes, we're very proud of mom or of dad. You would be surprised, even in an online program, how often they mention a faculty member who engaged with them. The faculty member that made a huge difference in their approach to their education. And so I throw that out to those of us who teach to help us be more thoughtful. We never know when that one extra effort to reach out to that student in a way that's not just grading a paper or responding to a discussion post, but an email or an outreach that touches them and says, someone cares about me. There's a book that I read, and I'm trying to think of the title now. Harari was the author. What do you think, Mr. I think it was, What Do You Think, Mr. Gonzalez? And it was the opening of the book was a student who had been from a migrant family in a community college classroom taking a general education course on, I think it was on Shakespeare. And the teacher looked down at him, and I may be getting the name wrong, but the teacher looked down at him and said, so, what do you think, Mr. Gonzalez? And he was taken aback and said, stammered, but he said it was the first time that anyone had asked me what I thought. And now he is a professor and was writing this book. So I just encourage us to think about that. The third is, how do we organize ourselves to do this? How do we create an organization that can provide the focus that we need to build educational experiences of this kind, that can help the students develop competence, that can engage them in ways that will give them a context. There's one aspect of that I would like to talk about just briefly, and that is, as part of our of this reimagination, reinvention process of ourselves over the last several months, we decided to create what we're calling the Center for the Enhancement of the First Year Experience. Students who come to, and this is particularly true of adult students, and in fact, Stephen Brookfield has commented on adult students having the imposter syndrome, especially those who in high school or in early attempts at the college experience were not successful. Doesn't mean they're not smart, just means they weren't successful. And so it is natural when they get into the classroom that they feel inadequate, because I think all of us have been in circumstances when the tapes start to play from our past. And we relive those experiences, and that sort of gut-wrenching feeling of inadequacy that I felt when I went into that college algebra class. Luckily, I didn't need that faculty member to inspire me, because I had to graduate so I could take care of family. But I think that's a really important aspect of this. And the second is to think about, how then do we get those students engaged? And one of the difficulties of doing that is, as we look at how we do Gen Ed, I'm going to make myself a note so I don't forget to talk about this. As we start them in general education, we have to go back to what I talked about earlier and think, these students, given where they are right now and what their goals are, and their goals are not uniform by any stretch, but there would be a natural distribution, and we know that from the surveys and research on adult students who are looking for those kinds of professional and career, that kind of learning that will help them advance in those areas. And they come into an institution and they get involved in general education courses, which I believe in. In fact, I think every course in the university, in any university, whether it's in the major or in the gen ed or in the entry course sequence, ought to be a liberal education course. A management professor isn't doing his or her job unless they're teaching, as they teach about motivation, about how human beings are, how human beings tick, the psychological aspects of it, the emotional aspects, all of the different parts that make us human, and the generalizations that we can make about that. We're failing. That's as much liberal education as almost any course. We just need to consciously introduce those elements. But the one thing that students often complain about, or will say if they didn't find the experience satisfying, is, well, I was studying things that didn't interest me, or that I couldn't see an application of. Well, I mean, we all know that there are experiences that we have that we don't know when we start them, why we're doing that, and why it's necessary, but we find afterwards that there, in fact, was a use. I think that history and political science and all of those are extremely valuable for us and ought to be part of a general education experience. But we know early in a program what students are looking for is that they want relevance to what their goal is on entering, which has to do with their careers and professions. And so our job, and there is a great deal of research to support this, our job is to give them that kind of context in the study of that. It's called a situated context. When you go back and talk about affective learning, it's creating a situated context that is most likely to spur that emotional response to make a student want to do this. And so, as we've talked about how we might evolve as an institution in terms of the way we help those early students in an undergraduate program make their way into their ultimate goal of major, how do we introduce those kinds of things early on? And one example that I've cited on several occasions, and some of you have heard me talk about it, is, in an English course. An English course for a working adult, I mean, I love the study of English. I love the study of languages and reading, but I also think that again, we have to think about the context in which those students are approaching it. Written and oral communication is one of those skills that employers told NACE are the most important to them. Well, when you think about how to teach students to write, and you teach them how to write using traditional kinds of assignments, you're limiting yourself, because you're limiting your ability to touch the affective core that's going to motivate them. And one way to overcome that is to teach it in a different way than we teach it. To teach it as, instead of an English course, it's a writing for the professions course. And in those courses, a business person, a person studying business would be writing the kinds of things that he or she, or the assignments might be the kinds of things that he or she would be writing as as an employee or a manager when the boss wants a report, or a nurse who is creating a care plan for a patient, and how do they write that, or a police officer who is writing an incident report. And you could go through any of the majors that our students are going to pursue, and think about how we might approach each course like that. I've quoted this before, I've recited this before, but Paulo Freire was an educational revolutionary, and Freire taught the Andean peasant farmers how to read. And he did that by engaging them in their political struggle. They were very poor, hardscrabble, and he taught them to read. He didn't teach them to read with the kinds of books that you would normally maybe teach someone to read with, a primer, or he taught them to read by reading newspapers and magazines that dealt with their political struggle. And they did it because they saw the relevance to their lives. They could gain knowledge that would help them and help their families, and help alleviate the poverty and the positions they were in. And he was extremely successful. That isn't isolated. We can make that kind of conscious decision when we teach. And so as we organize our learning, organize our colleges and our programs, and as we breathe new life into curriculum, I hope that we'll keep those kinds of things in mind. I'd like to go back in closing, and then just open for questions if there are any. Just to Herb Simon, learning results from what the student does and thinks, and only from what the student does and thinks. The teacher can advance learning only by influencing what the student does to learn. And to the degree that we can influence that, and the way we influence is by reaching a student through, as Hume said, through the passions, and exciting them to learn. That's when we'll succeed, and that's when students will come out of our programs fully competent in not only the NACE sense, but in the sense that they will be able to work their way through life far more successfully. And so that I appreciate the opportunity of doing this and just spouting, but I think back over what I just talked about, and I thought, my thinking has evolved as I've made additional connections on the things that I already knew, and that's what we want for our students. So, Kate, I am open to questions or discussion if there is any.
Yes, we've got a question. How has WASC been updated on our plans for structuring for the future?
Well, that's a good question. I have met a few times now with our WASC liaison, who is the senior vice president at WASC and their chief operating officer, and have gone through everything that we're doing with him. And so he knows exactly what we're working to accomplish. And my sense of my discussions with him, it was that he was very positive and felt that we were taking responsible steps.
The NACE standards do not include quantitative reasoning. How do we plan to address this?
Well, and I think that's a terrific point. I wish I could ask Tricia to come and speak to that. I think the NACE standards assume, in one sense, and let me say parenthetically, we're not going to drop our emphasis on quantitative reasoning, because that is part of critical thinking and problem solving. But I think that the NACE standards assume that a person coming out of a university program will have at least a basic appropriate level of math proficiency. doesn't mean that they need to know how to do calculus. I did take a calculus course, and I haven't used calculus, but I've certainly used some of the discipline of thinking. But I believe that those, and Trish can correct me, but I think that those are implicit in those standards. Trisha, you're on.
Hi,
Trisha,
can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I would actually, this is Trisha, AVP of Learning Assessment and Program Review, and I do actually have some feedback about that statement. The very first NACE competency is critical thinking and problem solving, which I'm a math educator by trade. That's my first profession, and that's the whole point of the study of mathematics. In that first competency, students are expected to exercise sound reasoning, to analyze, make decisions, and solve problems. The student should be able to obtain, interpret, and use knowledge, facts, and data in the process, and may demonstrate originality and inventiveness. When I taught math, I would teach students, for example, when solving linear equations, that they could solve them by substitution, linear combination, or matrices. And the whole point of that was so that they could use the most appropriate method to reach a conclusion. So I would actually like to change the commentary that quantitative reasoning is not included and say that it is as part of problem solving, which, to Craig's points that have been very well taken over the last 45 minutes, are probably more aligned with how we can support students moving forward in addressing the skills gap.
Thank you, Trish.
No problem.
Terrific.
You talked about collaboration and teamwork. How do you see collaboration and teamwork being incorporated into the classroom?
Well, and you hit something important on the head. And that is, in the online classroom, that's more difficult to do. And there are things that we can do. And I think we need to think through that issue as we go, as we start to re-engineer our curriculum in the direction that we're talking about. It's one of the reasons that you create co-curricular experiences for students. The other is, I think we can, and I would say, I think of our psychology club, for example, or what Dr. Woods has done with our honor society and the Golden Key, the kinds of experiences that we try to give virtually to students. But I think there's more that we can do in the area of communities that will allow people to learn to collaborate. To be sure, the idea of a discussion board is one of the basic ideas, is to allow for that kind of collaboration and discussion. Many of you have heard me for a long time say I'm not sure that the way we carry those out or design them is as effective as it could be. But I think there are other ways to create community and in a virtual space, and I look forward to working with everybody to thinking about that.
So kind of piggybacking off of what you just discussed, looking at mentoring and how potentially mentoring or even peer mentoring can be part of our approach to meaningful student and faculty engagement.
Yes, I'd like to speak to that just a little bit, because we're really taking a look at how to be more efficient and foster peer mentoring and combine that with faculty mentoring. And in fact, as we've gone through this process, we've had several discussions about how we can marry those things and how we can use some of the technological tools that are available to facilitate that kind of interaction and mentorship. And so I don't have all the answers to that. That's obviously one of those things that we will have a goal to do, but I do see that those are related, and that we want to encourage peer mentoring. We're doing a review of that program right now to look how it might change over time and how we might make it even more effective in doing what we helping us help our students become competent in that area.
Both this morning with the Dean panel with Iris Lafferty and Bob Dougherty, and in your keynote today, we've talked a lot about NACE. A question has come up about, are we looking to adopt a specific rubric? And perhaps this is also a Tricia question, outlining an alignment between NACE and WASC to support any redevelopment or advancement of courses and programs.
Tricia, would you like to comment on that one?
Of course. Can you repeat the second part of the question, Kate?
Yes. So looking at adopting, or are we specifically looking at adopting a rubric outlining the alignment of NACE and WASC to support, redevelopment or advancement of courses and programs?
So the short answer is absolutely yes. I think that this is a really exciting opportunity for faculty to really look deeply at their courses and programs and pretty much engage in curriculum mapping. As Craig mentioned, the ownership of these competencies is really falling contextually within the programs. And so I think that there's some work to be done to determine where some of these competencies most appropriately fit in the curricula, which I'm sure will ultimately end up resulting in curricular changes. Craig, anything to add?
No, I think you answered that. I'm very comfortable with that, and I think that's where we're headed.
Something a little different, but kind of a fun one, Dr. Swenson. We have somebody who's going through the BA in early learning education with differentiated learning, and just looking for any advice from you as they're going through their journey towards obtaining their degree.
Well, I think that pairs with the comment that I saw just before about if an instructor is not encouraging engagement, what can be done. The one thing that I would encourage is, I would encourage students to reach out to the faculty member more, to ask questions, to email them and say, I would really like the opportunity to spend just a little bit of time with you regarding this subject. Faculty members are a lot like our students. They have busy lives. They have many life roles, and so I think sometimes we have to, if a student raises a hand and asks a question metaphorically, it makes me pay attention and think about that. And so that's one thing that I would think about, is what's my responsibility for encouraging that faculty member to engage with me. The other side of that other question relates to how we structure the experience so that we improve the ability of faculty members. And that, I think, goes partially to the point of how we structure our discussion boards, for example.
We've got time for about one more question, and it was also a similar question was posed to Dr. Lafferty and Bob Dougherty, with the theme of the conference being Vision 2020, looking into the future. What are you most looking forward to in 2020 for Ashford University?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that, because I sat down yesterday and I just was doing a thought experiment, and I said, okay, I'm going to do a one-page strategic plan, and I wrote a vision statement from my point of view, what I see as the long term, how will we how will we meet our public purpose? How will we fulfill our mission in a way that is in the best interest and focuses on our students and their success and achievement? And I wrote this, I said, become recognized as the online institution that has done the best job of equipping graduates with the durable, adaptive, transferable competencies that will enable them to achieve success in their lives and in their careers. And that is recognized as an institution that employers see as a major contributor to closing the skills gap. I think that focus on who we are now and how we best fulfill our mission and recognize what our mission is and refocus on it. I think that's what I see as our future, and that would be my 3 to 5 year vision. And then at some point I might share this out, but I wrote a mission, purposes, values, and 2 or 3 points of strategy for us to get there. We've really undertaken the first step in doing that through this restructuring, but this is just the beginning, and we have we're at the bottom of the mountain, and we just need to keep climbing so that we're relevant and make a difference in our students' lives. So thank you. I thought it was a great question.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Swenson, for taking the time to share your wisdom and your thoughts and your vision for our institution at TLC. We're always grateful that you take us up on the offer to be a keynote